My father refused to walk me down the aisle at my wedding because my sister scheduled her cat's birthday party on the same day. My sister announced her cat's birthday party on the same call where I asked my father to walk me down the aisle, and I honestly thought she was joking for a full 5 seconds. I even laughed a little. Not a cute laugh either. More like the kind that slips out when your brain is trying to protect you from the fact that something deeply stupid is happening in real time. She didn't laugh back. My father didn't either. There was just this weird silence on the line, heavy and careful. Like everybody but me already knew what the script was, and I had wandered into the scene too late. I was standing in my apartment kitchen with a grocery list in one hand and a pen cap in my mouth, surrounded by wedding mess. Fabric swatches, half-open mail, one shoebox, and a spreadsheet I had printed because I apparently enjoy suffering in multiple formats. My fiancé had gone out to pick up dinner, and my name is Julie, by the way. And I had called my father because I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have one normal moment. One. A small one. He didn't have to cry. He didn't have to apologize for my entire childhood. He just had to say yes. Instead, he cleared his throat and said my sister had already planned something important for that day. I said, important like what? He hesitated. Actually hesitated. Long enough for my stomach to drop. Then my sister, who had apparently been sitting right there listening, cut in and said, it's Muffin's memorial birthday. You know I do it every year. And that was the moment my body went cold. Because first of all, the cat was not dead. Very much alive. Extremely round. Probably on a windowsill somewhere licking itself and contributing absolutely nothing to the collapse of my family. Second, she had started calling it a memorial birthday because our mother had loved that cat, and because everything in this family had to get filtered through grief if she wanted it to count. Third, my wedding date had been set for over a year. I pulled the pen cap out of my mouth and said, "You're not seriously doing this." She gave this tiny, offended laugh. That soft, fake, fragile one she used whenever she wanted to sound wounded instead of manipulative. Wow. Okay, sorry my mental health is inconvenient again. There it was. The family anthem. My father tried to calm things down right away. He always did that thing where he talked to both of us like we were equally responsible for whatever disaster was happening, even when one of us was clearly lighting the match and the other one was just standing there holding a towel. He said he knew this was painful. He knew emotions were high. He knew everybody had reasons. Everybody had reasons. I said, "Dad, I didn't call to compare reasons. I called to ask if you'd walk me down the aisle." Another silence. Smaller this time. Meaner. Then he said the words that should probably be stamped on my forehead because apparently they have followed me my whole life. "You know you're the stronger one." I leaned against the counter and shut my eyes. Of course. Of course I was. I was the stronger one when our mother got sick. I was the stronger one when she died. I was the stronger one when my sister stopped doing dishes, stopped going to class, stopped speaking to anyone unless she needed money or sympathy or somebody to tell her she was very brave for getting out of bed. I was the stronger one when my father decided strength meant you could be neglected without complaint. So I said, "I need you too." Very quiet, very simple. Honestly more honest than I wanted to be. And my father exhaled like I had asked him to lift a truck. My sister started crying then. Fast. Convenient. Almost professional. She said if he abandoned her on that day, she didn't know what kind of state she'd be in. And I swear to God I could hear him turning toward her through the phone. That's how trained I was. I knew the exact sound of him choosing her before he had even chosen her out loud. When my fiancé came back with takeout, I was still in the kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my fingers hurt. He took one look at my face and set the bags down slowly. I ended the call without even saying goodbye. My father called back twice. My sister once. I ignored all of it. Then I told him what happened. Not elegantly, not in a measured, grown, healed way. I told it in angry bursts, pacing barefoot through the apartment, waving my arms around like I was trying to direct traffic with grief. The cat. The memorial birthday. The stronger one speech. The implication that my wedding could apparently move around a pet-centered emotional pageant built on our mother's memory. My fiancé just listened. That's one of the first things I loved about him. He didn't rush to fix my feelings like they were a plumbing issue. He let me have them. When I finally stopped talking, he asked, "Do you want me to call them?" I laughed again, but this time I almost cried with it. "No, I want to be adopted by another family." He walked over, put his hands on my shoulders and said, "For what it's worth, this is insane." And that was the first real comfort I got all day. Not a solution, just confirmation. Yes, this was insane. No, I wasn't overreacting. Yes, my family had somehow found a way to make my wedding about my sister's cat and my mother's ghost. which honestly was so on brand it almost impressed me. My mother died when I was 16, and I know everybody says losing a parent changes the weather inside a house, but that doesn't even cover it. It changed the laws of physics in ours. Things that used to be balanced stopped making sense. Up became down. Need became power. Sadness became currency. My sister had always been my father's favorite in a soft, obvious way before that, the kind of thing people pretend not to notice because calling it out makes holidays awkward. She was the delicate one, the artistic one, the one who got overwhelmed easily. I was the practical one, the one who remembered permission slips and loaded the dishwasher right and knew where the extra batteries were. Even as a kid, I could feel it, that strange little split in how we were seen. She got protected, I got trusted, which sounds nice until you realize trusted in a lot of families just means left alone. After our mother got sick, it got worse. Not instantly. That would have almost been easier to understand. At first, we were all just scared and tired and pretending routines still mattered. Hospital visits, casseroles from neighbors, insurance arguments, the smell of hand sanitizer everywhere. My sister cried a lot, loudly, in rooms where other people could hear. My father held her through it like she was still 9. I cried in the shower, mostly because I hated people watching me break down. My mother noticed everything, of course. Even when she was exhausted. Even when she was trying to smile through pain she should never have had to carry. She would squeeze my hand and ask if I'd eaten. She would ask if my homework was done. She would ask me to remind my father about bills. Looking back, I don't think she meant to make me the capable one. I think she was trying to survive and I happened to be easier to lean on. But after she died, that arrangement hardened into something ugly. My sister stopped doing almost anything that made her uncomfortable. She'd say she felt sick, or foggy, or emotionally underwater. Sometimes I believed her. Sometimes I absolutely didn't. The problem was that it stopped mattering which one was true, because my father treated every feeling she had like a medical emergency. If she snapped at me, she was grieving. If she forgot rent when she was older, she was spiraling. If she spent money she didn't have, she was coping. If I got upset about any of this, I was being harsh. I was being cold. I was not understanding that people break differently. And listen, I do understand that. I really do. Grief can turn people into versions of themselves they don't recognize. It can make them selfish. It can make them soft in the wrong places and hard in the wrong ones. But grief is not holy water. You don't get to splash it over every bad choice and call it untouchable. My sister did. My father let her. There was one year, right after our mother died, when my sister decided our mother's cat was basically a living spiritual bridge. That was the phrase she used. A living spiritual bridge. I remember because I almost choked on mashed potatoes when she said it at dinner, and my father glared at me like I had insulted a priest. The cat had belonged to all of us, technically. But once our mother was gone, my sister claimed this special bond with it. She started talking to it about our mother, started buying it little outfits, started making social media posts about keeping her memory alive through traditions. My father ate it up. He said if these rituals helped her, we should support them. Support turned into orbit. Everything in the house started rotating around my sister's emotional theater. By the time I turned 18, I had gotten very good at leaving before an argument could start. I left for college in another city and felt guilty about how relieved I was. Not dramatic movie relieved, not standing on a bus platform with the sun on my face relieved. More like breathing a full breath for the first time in years and being annoyed that oxygen had the nerve to feel so good. My father cried when he dropped me off, and for one stupid moment I thought maybe distance would reset us. Maybe without daily chaos, he'd see me more clearly. Maybe we'd become the kind of parent and daughter who chose each other on purpose instead of just sharing a last name and old grief. We didn't. We became functional. That's the word I use when I don't want to say hollow. We called on birthdays. On holidays. Sometimes on Sunday afternoons if he was in the car and my sister was asleep or out, or temporarily not in crisis. He asked about classes, then jobs, then apartments, then my boyfriend, who later became my fiancé. He said he was proud of me a few times, always in this slightly surprised tone that managed to be nice and weird at the same time. Like, wow, look at you, continuing to exist with competence. Incredible. Meanwhile, my sister bounced from one half plan to another. Jobs she hated, roommates she fought with, creative dreams she announced like press releases and abandoned like wet laundry. And every time something collapsed, she went back to my father. He never called it enabling. He called it helping family. A year before my engagement, she quit a perfectly stable job to start a jewelry business with a friend. No market research, no savings, no clue, just mood boards, an online shop, and the absolute confidence of someone who had never really been allowed to hit the ground. They borrowed money from relatives. They held a launch party. They posted photos of bracelets on velvet with captions about female entrepreneurship and healing through art. 3 months later, the whole thing was in flames. Orders late, supplier mess, taxes ignored, friendship exploded. She came home crying and said people had sabotaged her. My father paid off part of the debt. He also postponed retirement. He said he couldn't leave her unsupported while she was so fragile. I said, "Dad, she is not a bomb squad situation. She is a grown woman who made dumb choices." He got very quiet in that disappointed way he had, like my realism was a moral defect. "You always make everything sound so harsh." Maybe I did. Maybe I still do. But harsh and false are not the same thing. And my family loved confusing them. So when my fiancé proposed after almost 8 years together, I knew my sister would make it weird. I didn't know how. I just knew. Some people get normal pre-wedding worries, seating charts, money, rain. I had all of that, plus a lifelong instinct that any joy I showed too openly in front of my family would be treated like a personal attack. Turns out my instincts were underreacting. The thing about favoritism is that people outside the family almost never see the full shape of it. They catch moments, a weird comment, an uneven gift, somebody getting defended too fast. But they don't live inside the pattern long enough to understand how much of your personality gets built around managing it. I got good at being low maintenance because high maintenance was already taken. I got good at joking through hurt because if I said things too plainly, I got accused of making the room tense. I got good at anticipating disaster because in my family, peace was usually just the pause before my sister needed everyone to rearrange themselves again. So when we got engaged, I told myself I was going to be calm, boundaries, reasonable expectations, no begging for emotional basics from people who had spent years acting like basics were a luxury item. My fiancé and I planned a wedding we could actually afford, which meant not tiny, not extravagant, and definitely not the kind of event where strangers in white gloves hand out tiny spoons with one grape on them. We wanted something warm, busy, a little chaotic, very us. Good food, people we actually liked, music loud enough to cover awkward family energy. I called my father before we announced it publicly because I was still, apparently, that daughter, the considerate one, the one who thought maybe if I did things in the right order, I'd earn a different result. He sounded happy, really happy, enough that I hated myself for feeling relieved. He asked if my fiancé had asked properly, which made me snort because what did that even mean anymore? Properly. Like he had approached a farmhouse with a hat in his hand and requested my future from the porch. But my father laughed too, and for a minute it felt easy. Then he said he hoped this wouldn't be too hard on my sister. I almost dropped the phone. Not congratulations first. Not how are you feeling. Not wow. Your mother would have loved this. Straight to my sister. I said, "I'm sorry. Why would my engagement be hard on her?" He started backpedaling immediately, talking about timing and sensitivity and how she had been struggling since the business collapsed. I said I wasn't marrying her ex-boyfriend or selling her house. I was getting engaged. He told me not to be flippant. I told him not to be ridiculous. That was basically our relationship in one exchange. When I told my sister later, she stared at the ring for too long and said, "Must be nice." That's all. Must be nice. I asked what that meant, which I absolutely should not have done because she lives for invitations to explain herself while pretending she doesn't want to. She shrugged, did that thin smile thing, and said some people get to build these stable little lives because everything just works out for them. I actually laughed because I genuinely didn't know what planet she was speaking from. My life had not just worked out, I had worked. Period. Jobs I hated. Cheap apartments, panic over rent, student loans, crying in parking lots, all the glamorous rites of passage. But in my sister's mythology, effort barely existed. There were lucky people and unlucky people, and she somehow always played the tragic lead. My father called me that night and asked if I could keep wedding talk a little softer around her. Softer around her. Like my happiness needed to come with a volume warning. From there, it was death by 1,000 little cuts. She'd post vague things on a social media app about people flaunting joy while others were barely surviving. She'd text me links to articles about economic downturns and wedding debt with no explanation. Once she asked if I had considered just eloping so Dad wouldn't be under so much pressure. I said pressure from what, exactly? And she replied, existing in this family the way I do. Which was impressive, honestly. Making my wedding about her nervous system was advanced work even for her. Still, my father kept telling me to be patient. He said she wasn't jealous. She was grieving her own path. He said I had to stop taking everything personally. That one always got me because what exactly was the alternative? Sorry, I misread the part where my sister openly resents me and my father manages her emotions at my expense. My mistake. My fiancé watched all of this with increasing disbelief. He tried to stay respectful, mostly because he knew how complicated family loyalty can be when you're the one inside it. But every now and then he'd look at me after a call and say, very carefully, that was not normal. No, it wasn't. The final stretch before the wedding was supposed to be fun. Stressful, sure, but regular stressful. Guest count menu. My dress needing one more alteration because apparently my body enjoys changing shape every time a deadline approaches. Instead, it turned into this strange emotional hostage situation where my father kept acting like he was caught between two daughters with equally valid needs instead of between reality and whatever story my sister had decided to tell this week. About a week before the wedding, I called him and asked him directly to walk me down the aisle. I already told you how that went. What I didn't say yet is that I had put that call off for months because some part of me knew. I knew there was a chance he would somehow make that moment complicated. I just didn't think he'd do it with a cat. That part still feels fake when I say it out loud. After I hung up on them that night, I blocked both of them and sat on my living room floor eating cold noodles out of the carton while my fiancé rubbed circles on my back. Very glamorous bride behavior. I cried, then got angry at myself for crying, then got angry that I was angry at myself. It was a whole spiral. At some point I said, why am I still surprised? This is exactly who they are. He said, because you keep hoping they'll be different this time. Rude, accurate, very annoying. The next morning, my father left a voicemail from an unknown number saying he wanted to talk when everybody was calmer. Everybody. Again, that equal language. That both sides disease. I didn't call back. Instead, I went to work, answered emails, nodded through a meeting, and almost burst into tears because somebody asked if my dad was excited for the wedding. I lied. Of course I lied. Family humiliation is such a specific flavor. You don't always know how to serve it in public without choking on it. That night, I told my fiancé the part I hadn't really admitted fully yet, that asking my father to walk me down the aisle wasn't tradition for me. It wasn't symbolism. It was a test. A pathetic one, maybe, but a real one. I needed to know if there was any day, any single day, when he would look at me and choose me first without making me earn it by being easy. My fiancé didn't call me pathetic. He didn't even call it a test. He just said, and now you know. I hated him a little for being right. Then, because pain makes me creative in terrible ways, I did something impulsive. I called my father's twin brother. I hadn't spoken to my uncle in months, and even before that, we weren't exactly close. He and my father had one of those lifelong sibling rivalries that had started so young, nobody even remembered the original crime. Maybe a baseball glove, maybe a broken bike, maybe just two boys discovering early that love felt safer when it was competitive. By the time I was old enough to notice, they could barely get through one holiday meal without finding some sideways way to insult each other. Same face, same hands, same stubborn jaw, totally different energy. My father was quiet mean when he wanted to be. My uncle was loud mean. Honestly, a real gift set. But my uncle always liked me. Or maybe he just liked that I annoyed my father by existing with opinions. Hard to say. When he answered, I nearly chickened out. I almost said it was a wrong number. Instead, I blurted, "Hey, do you want to do something petty and unforgettable?" He laughed immediately. Now that's an opening. So I told him. The engagement, the cat party, the stronger one speech, the wedding, the refusal. I expected outrage. I expected maybe some mild sympathy mixed with family gossip hunger. What I got was a long, low whistle, and then, "Your father really has committed to the dumbest possible lane." I laughed so hard I snorted. It was the first time since that call that I felt anything close to relief. Then I said, "Would you walk me down the aisle?" There was a beat of silence. He understood instantly. Not the emotional meaning. Let's not romanticize the man. But the strike. The beautiful, humiliating strike of it. He said, "You want me to walk you down the aisle at your wedding while your father is at a cat birthday party?" I said yes. He said, "Absolutely." Did I invite him because I suddenly felt some deep healing bond with him? No. Let's be serious. I invited him because I was hurt and furious and I wanted my father to feel the shape of what he had done in public. I wanted other people to see it. I wanted him to see it. That was not my highest self. That was my most wounded self wearing lipstick and holding a match. We posted a photo together the next day after meeting for coffee. Nothing huge. Just him with his arm around me and a caption about being grateful for family who show up. Petty, subtle, nuclear, a masterpiece. My father called within an hour. I watched his name flash across my screen from the blocked call log and felt this ugly little thrill in my chest. Which, again, not my best moment. But I don't lie about myself when the truth is less flattering. I wanted him rattled. I wanted him uncomfortable. I wanted him dragged out of that soft, tragic fog he always wrapped around my sister and forced to look at the actual consequence of choosing her over me. I answered on the third try. He didn't say hello. He said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Solving the problem." He was furious in a way I had almost never seen. Not sad, not disappointed, furious. Which told me everything. My pain hadn't moved him. My humiliation hadn't moved him. But his brother stepping into his role? That moved mountains. He said I was trying to embarrass him. I said he embarrassed himself. He said family business didn't belong on display. I said maybe he should have thought of that before skipping his daughter's wedding for a cat-themed grief festival. He actually gasped. Like I had crossed some line by describing the situation accurately. Then he did something almost funny in its predictability. He said maybe he could still convince my sister to reschedule if I canceled this stunt immediately. I went silent. Because there it was. The proof. The thing I think I had known but still needed to hear out loud. He could push her. He could challenge her. He could try harder. He had just chosen not to until it threatened his pride. I said, "So when it was me in pain, there was nothing you could do. But when it's him in a suit beside me, suddenly there are options." He tried to explain. He always tried to explain when the truth got too naked. He said I didn't understand how fragile she was right now, how close to the edge she'd been, how terrified he was of saying the wrong thing. I asked him what exactly the edge was this week. Tears? A screaming fit? A sad post online? He told me not to be cruel. I said, "You keep calling honesty cruel because it's easier than admitting you're scared of her." That one hit. I know it did because he went very quiet. Then he said something I will probably hear in my sleep when I'm old. "She needs me more." I don't even remember deciding to cry. It just happened. Hot and immediate and embarrassing. Because nothing makes me feel more childish than crying while trying to sound strong. I said, "Do you hear yourself? You keep saying the quiet part out loud, and then acting shocked when I react." He started crying too then, which almost made it worse. My father cries in this stunned way, like his own emotions surprise him every time. He said he was doing his best. He said he'd failed us both in different ways. He said I had to know he loved me, and that was the problem. I did know he loved me. That's what made it so much harder. If he didn't love me, everything would have been cleaner. But he did love me. He just loved me in that half-useful, half-devastating way some parents do, where affection exists but doesn't save you, where they can genuinely care and still consistently choose the child who demands more. Love isn't magic. Ask any daughter who grew up starving in a house full of food. I said I wasn't canceling my uncle. He said if I went through with this, I would damage things permanently. I almost laughed again. Permanently. As if we were standing in some pristine, untouched place and not in the wreckage of years. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so hard I dropped my phone on the couch. My fiancé came out of the bathroom with toothpaste still at the corner of his mouth and took one look at me. I said, "He can move mountains for his pride, apparently." My fiancé sat beside me and asked if I still wanted my uncle to do it. I said yes immediately. Then no. Then maybe. Then I cried harder because apparently my emotional range that week was every station at once. The truth was, I wanted revenge, but I also wanted dignity. And those are not the same thing. Sometimes they overlap just enough to confuse you. Over the next day, my father kept calling from different numbers. My sister sent one message that said, "Congratulations on turning your wedding into another way to hurt people," which was rich. Truly rich. I typed out 12 responses and sent none of them, mostly because none of them would fix the part that actually hurt. I didn't want my uncle. Not really. I wanted my father to want to be there. And once that truth settled in, the revenge started feeling smaller than the grief. The day after my uncle agreed to walk me down the aisle, I met him for coffee mostly because it felt ridiculous to make a life-changing petty arrangement over the phone and then not look each other in the face. He was exactly what he had always been. Loud, charming in bursts, a little inappropriate, and thrilled by drama that wasn't technically his. He hugged me too hard, called my father an idiot in the first 2 minutes, and spent the next half hour telling stories from their childhood like he was building a legal case for why my father had always been impossible. At first, I let him. It was weirdly soothing, like borrowing somebody else's anger for a minute so I didn't have to carry mine alone. He reminded me of things I had forgotten, how my father hated being shown up, how he could endure personal pain way better than public embarrassment, how he had spent years pretending he was above petty sibling competition while secretly treating every family gathering like a scorecard. My uncle said, "He can tolerate guilt. He can't tolerate humiliation." That landed hard because it explained the speed of my father's reaction better than anything else. Then my uncle leaned back and said, "So, do you actually want me there, or do you want him to imagine me there?" I stared at him, because rude. Also because fair. He shrugged. "I'm not offended either way. I'd enjoy it, obviously. But there's a difference between wanting support and wanting impact." I looked down at my coffee, then out the window, then back at him. "Can it be both?" He laughed. "Sure, but one of those lasts longer." That irritated me all day because he was right, and I hate when the least emotionally responsible person in a room says something wise by accident. When I got home, my fiancé was going over the seating chart with that focused face he gets when he's trying to make order out of chaos. He'd highlighted names and circled possible problem zones like he was mapping a weather system. Which, to be fair, he kind of was. I dropped my bag and said, "My uncle is annoyingly insightful." He didn't even look up. That must have been jarring. I sat across from him and finally said the thing I had been resisting. "I don't know if I want him to walk me down the aisle anymore." He set the highlighter down. I expected him to say good, because he had already gently hinted that turning my ceremony into a message for my father might not feel as satisfying in the moment as it did in theory. Instead, he asked, "What do you want it to feel like when you walk in? Not who, not what statement, what feeling?" That question undid me more than any argument had, because the truth was I wanted to feel proud. Steady. Chosen, yes, but not borrowed. I didn't want to spend that moment looking for my father's reaction or imagining his. I didn't want my wedding memory tied forever to whether my revenge landed cleanly. I had already given my family enough of my life. I didn't want to hand them the center of that too. So I said, very softly, "I think I want to walk by myself." My fiancé nodded like he had known that before I did. "Then that's what you do." I called my uncle that evening and told him. He was gracious, which surprised me. He made a joke about being demoted from symbol to guest, then got serious and said maybe it was better this way. He said if I walked in alone, nobody would mistake it for anything but truth. That line stayed with me. I unblocked my father long enough to send one message. I said I had changed my mind and would be walking myself down the aisle. I said he was welcome to attend as a guest if he chose to. I said that choice was now entirely his, and if he didn't come, I would understand that as final. No bargaining, no extra drama, no more discussions about my sister's emotional weather. Just a choice. He didn't answer. That silence should have been my answer. It was my answer. But hope is disgusting. It hangs around after logic has packed up and left. The next 2 days were a blur of normal wedding stress laid on top of this giant emotional sinkhole. My best friend from work came over to help steam dresses and found me rage cleaning the bathroom at 11 at night. She took the sponge out of my hand and said, "Either sit down or cry, but no more scrubbing your feelings into tile." I laughed and then immediately cried, because apparently people only needed to look at me kindly for half a second and my whole face would fall apart. I didn't tell many people the full story before the wedding. I couldn't stand the shame of explaining it more than once. I gave edited versions. Family stuff. My sister's having a hard time. My dad is being complicated. Complicated, by the way, is such a scam of a word. It makes repeated harm sound intellectual. The morning of the wedding arrived too early and not early enough. I barely slept. My stomach was a tight little fist. The suite where we got ready smelled like hairspray, coffee, and nerves. Everybody kept saying I looked beautiful, which was kind, but I felt more like somebody who had accidentally wandered onto a stage without remembering her lines. My phone stayed face down most of the morning. I told myself I wasn't waiting for him. Then every 15 minutes I checked anyway. Nothing. No message from my father. No call. No, on my way. Nothing from my sister either, which honestly felt more threatening than if she had sent something dramatic. At one point, while somebody pinned part of my hair and somebody else hunted for a missing earring, I stepped into the hallway alone, just to breathe. My reflection in the mirror startled me. I looked like myself, but sharper. Nicer, obviously, because makeup is witchcraft, but also older somehow. Not old, just done. Done waiting. Done translating other people's selfishness into tragedies that required my compassion. My fiancé sent a message from the other room that said, "Still no fires. Promising start." I laughed out loud. Then he sent another. Also. You don't owe anybody grace today. That was maybe the best wedding gift anybody gave me. Right before the ceremony, one of the coordinators asked if I was ready for my escort queue, and I said, I'm walking alone. She didn't flinch. Didn't ask if I was sure in that fake soothing voice people use when they think you're making a mistake under stress. She just nodded and adjusted the timing. Something about that tiny practical respect almost made me cry again. When the music changed, everything got weirdly quiet inside me. Not peaceful. Let's not get carried away. But focused. The doors opened, and there I was. Just me. Dress, heartbeat, years of family nonsense. All of it. I felt exposed for half a second. Like everybody could see the exact shape of the bruise under the fabric. Then I saw my fiancé at the end of the aisle looking at me like I was the only real thing in the room, and something in me locked into place. I walked. I did not scan the seats for my father right away, because I knew if I did and he wasn't there, I might wobble. So I kept my eyes forward until I reached the front. My fiancé took my hands. They were ice cold. He squeezed once, gently, like a private yes. Only then did I glance toward the chairs. My father's seat was empty. I wish I could say I transcended it. I didn't. A hard little shard of grief went straight through me in that exact moment, quick and clean. But the music kept going, the room kept breathing, and I did the next thing and then the next one. That's adulthood in a nutshell, honestly. Being devastated while still hitting your marks. We got married, and it was beautiful. Messy and loud and real and ours. I laughed during the vows because my voice cracked. People cried. The food was good. My shoes hurt. For long stretches of time, I actually forgot to be heartbroken. Then during the reception, my father finally texted. I saw his name on the screen while standing near the cake table talking to one of my cousins, and my whole body knew what it was before I opened it. I stepped away, read it alone, and there it was. He was sorry, but your sister needed me more today. She had become extremely distressed and threatened to spiral if left alone. He hoped I could understand. He was disappointed in how vindictive I had become with his brother. He loved me. He wished us happiness. I read it 3 times. Not because it was complicated. Just because sometimes cruelty looks so ordinary on a screen, it takes a second to register that it really happened. Then I locked my phone and went back inside. Because he was not getting the rest of my wedding too, I didn't make a scene when I got my father's text. That part matters to me, mostly because there were about 9 different scenes available, and I chose none of them. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't start sobbing in a bathroom stall. I didn't march into the middle of the dance floor and announce to the room that my father had officially chosen a healthy adult cat celebration over my wedding. Though, for the record, that last option did flirt with me. What I did was stand outside the reception hall for a full minute with the phone in my hand and my face arranged into something I hoped looked neutral from a distance. My cousin came over and asked if everything was okay, and I said, yeah, just family nonsense, which has probably been my most repeated line since puberty. She gave me the kind of look people give when they know you're lying, but also know you don't want rescue yet. Then my fiancé came outside, took one look at me, and said, "What happened?" I handed him the phone without a word. He read the message. His jaw tightened, not dramatically, just enough. Then he gave the phone back and said, "You don't have to answer that tonight," which was good because I had about 15 possible answers, and all of them sounded like something you'd screenshot for future court proceedings. Instead, I slipped the phone into my bag and went back to my wedding. That sentence sounds cleaner than the experience felt. It wasn't graceful, it was active resistance. It was choosing, over and over, not to let my father sit invisibly at the edge of every happy minute and stain it. I danced, I hugged people. I ate cake that I could barely taste. I smiled for photos I still haven't looked at closely because part of me is afraid I'll be able to see the exact second I became a person, without a father in any meaningful emotional sense. At some point, one of my older relatives asked where my father and sister were, and I just said the truth, because I was too tired to protect anybody. I said my sister planned her cat's birthday event for the same day and my father chose that instead. I expected confusion, maybe awkward pity. I did not expect outrage. But outrage is what I got. You have to understand, a lot of my extended family knew my sister was sensitive. That was the official language around her. They knew my father babied her. They knew there was tension. What they did not know, because my family is very committed to private dysfunction dressed up as dignity, was how far it actually went. Once the first relative heard it, the story spread fast. I didn't have to tell it more than twice. By the 3rd time, people were walking up to me already furious on my behalf, asking if it was true. An aunt I barely ever agreed with said, "He did what?" So loudly the bartender turned around. I should tell you this did not heal me. Public validation is nice, but it is not the same thing as being loved correctly. Still, I won't pretend it didn't matter. There was something grounding about watching other people react the way I had felt. Their shock reminded me that I wasn't asking for too much. I wasn't dramatic. The situation really was that absurd. By the end of the night, my father had become a whispered scandal. I knew it. He probably knew it too. Somewhere at that cat party or memorial or emotional hostage summit or whatever they were calling it, he was likely getting texts from relatives asking where he was and why. My sister, I am sure, positioned herself as wounded by my cruelty before anyone could question her timing. That's her favorite move. Bleed first, own the narrative. The next morning, I woke up married and hollow at the same time. My husband, saying that still felt strange and kind of hilarious, because the man had barely had time to finish being my fiancé before my family tried to turn the whole thing into a Greek tragedy with litter box themes, brought me coffee and asked if I wanted to read messages together or ignore the world for a day. I said, "Let's ruin my peace efficiently." So we read them. There were sweet messages from friends, photos, memes from people who knew I was overwhelmed and were trying to keep me from dissolving. Then there were family messages. Some were kind, some were fishing, some were clearly forwarded concern disguised as innocence. Heard there was a misunderstanding. Your father sounds distraught. Maybe give everybody a little grace. That last one nearly made me throw the phone into a decorative plant. Then my sister sent a long message. No hello, no congratulations, just accusation. She said I had humiliated our father on purpose. She said I had weaponized private pain for attention. She said the family was attacking her, and he was getting calls nonstop because I had chosen to be vindictive instead of compassionate. She said I knew how unstable she'd been, and I didn't care. She said normal sisters wouldn't do this to each other. That line actually made me laugh out loud because normal sisters also don't schedule cat grief pageants over each other's weddings. But apparently, we were skipping that part. I drafted a response, deleted it, drafted another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, "I told the truth. If the truth embarrasses you, that's not my job to fix." She responded almost instantly. "You always think you're right because you're cold." There it was again, cold. My least favorite family adjective. The label they slapped on me anytime I refused to perform softness in the exact shape they wanted. Never mind that I had spent years smoothing over scenes, lending money I didn't really have, talking gently when I wanted to scream. The second I stopped cushioning other people's chaos, I became cold. I sent one more message. "Do not contact me again unless somebody is in the hospital." Then I blocked her. My father waited until we were on our short honeymoon trip to call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I am apparently a volunteer participant in my own suffering. Also because some traitorous part of me still thought maybe he'd say the right thing, not fix it. Just finally say it clearly. He didn't. He launched straight into context, explanation, nuance. Your sister was panicking. Your uncle was humiliating me. You know how fragile things are here. I let him talk for almost 2 minutes because I wanted to be sure before I lost it. Then I interrupted and said, "You missed my wedding." Silence. Then, "I know." "No," I said. "I don't think you do. I don't think you know what that means." He started crying again. I swear that sound now makes my shoulders tense automatically. He said he had been trying to hold the family together. He said he was terrified of my sister doing something reckless if he left. He said he thought I, of all people, would understand. Because I had always been the level-headed one. I said, "You keep calling me level-headed when what you mean is neglected." That shut him up. Then he did something so ugly and so predictable it almost felt scripted. He brought up inheritance. Not right away. He eased into it like a coward, saying choices have consequences, saying family wounds don't vanish, saying I had handled things in a way that changed trust. Then he mentioned our mother's jewelry, pieces she had loved, pieces she had shown both of us when we were younger, saying one day they would be divided fairly because she wanted both her girls to have something of hers. He said if I was choosing estrangement and public disrespect, he didn't see how he could justify giving me those things anymore. I was sitting on the edge of a hotel bed in a cheap robe with wet hair dripping down my back, listening to my father use my dead mother's jewelry like a disciplinary tool. I felt something in me go still. Not calm, still. I said, "So that's what this is." Obedience gets memory. He got defensive immediately. Said I was twisting his words, said he was talking about responsibility and family loyalty. I said, "No, you're talking about control. You are taking the last thing she explicitly wanted to share equally and turning it into a prize for whoever makes your life easier. He said I was being unfair. Maybe, but not inaccurate. And the thing that hurt most wasn't even the jewelry itself. It was what it represented. My mother, for all her flaws and all the ways illness rearranged our family before she died, had seen me. She had made a point of fairness. She had named it. And now my father was trying to rewrite even that, as if he owned the archive of her love and could edit my access. I started crying then, quietly, not dramatic, just tears slipping out because there are only so many times you can watch the same wound happen before your body gives up pretending it's manageable. He heard it and softened, which honestly almost made me angrier. He said, "You know I love you." I said, "I do. That's the problem." And for the first time in the whole conversation, he had nothing useful to say. After that call, something changed in a way that was less dramatic than people expect and more final than they understand. There was no giant speech, no cinematic "I'm done with this family" moment with trembling hands and swelling music. I hung up, sat there with the robe half open and my hair soaking the shoulders, and stared at the ugly hotel art across from the bed until my husband came out of the bathroom and said my name twice. I handed him the phone and told him the short version. He read my face before he read the room, if that makes sense. He sat beside me, one leg tucked under, and listened while I explained the jewelry part. Our mother's promise. My father's threat. My sister somehow, still at the center of everything like a black hole with decorative pillows. When I finished, I expected comfort, reassurance, some line about how family can still come back from terrible things. Instead, he said very gently, "You don't have to keep proving you can survive this." I stared at him. He kept going. "You've been surviving them for years. You don't owe them continued access just because you happen to be good at enduring pain." That one got me, because that had been the trap. Hadn't it? The stronger one thing. The capable one thing. My whole family had quietly built a moral system around my resilience, and I had helped. I had worn competence like armor so long they started treating it like consent. She falls apart. Therefore she gets softness. You hold together. Therefore you can take one more hit. It sounds almost logical when you say it fast enough. It also ruins people. On the drive home from the trip, I blocked my father again. Then I unblocked him once to send one last message because apparently I need closure in writing like a person leaving a bad job. I said I did not want updates about my sister's feelings, her plans, her crises, or the cat. I said if there was a genuine life or death emergency, someone could contact me through another relative. Otherwise, I needed distance, and I would decide if or when that changed. I said this was not revenge. It was self-protection. Then I blocked him everywhere I could think of. That should have been the clean ending. It wasn't. Because family systems don't collapse politely the second one person stops participating. They wobble. They reach. They recruit. My aunt called a week later saying my father wasn't sleeping and had lost weight. I said I was sorry to hear that. She paused, like maybe she thought I'd take the bait and ask follow-up questions. I didn't. Then she said, "He's really suffering." I almost laughed. Not because I wanted him to suffer. I didn't. But because I'd spent years suffering in ways he considered manageable as long as I did it quietly. A cousin texted me saying my sister was telling people I had always hated her because she was vulnerable. That one annoyed me enough to make me pace the kitchen. Vulnerable. Such a beautiful word when it's real. Such a disgusting weapon when it's not. She wasn't just vulnerable. She was controlling, self-centered, manipulative when scared. All human things, honestly. I don't need her to be a monster to justify leaving. I just need her to be who she has consistently been. I didn't respond to the cousin. I stopped explaining myself to relatives who liked the drama but not the burden of taking a side. That was another new thing for me. Silence without guilt. Or okay, not without guilt. Less guilt. Manageable guilt. Discount guilt. Then there was the box. About 3 weeks after the wedding, a package showed up at our apartment with my father's handwriting on the label. My whole body reacted before my brain did. Not fear exactly. More that old familiar dread, like opening a grade you already know you failed even though you did the work. I just stood there with the box on the table while my husband made dinner and kept glancing over like he expected it to hiss. Inside was a framed photo of our mother, one of the nice ones from before she got sick, and a note. The note said he thought I should have this because I had always been closer to her practical side. Practical side. Even in apology-adjacent gestures, he managed to split us into categories. My sister got fragility and spiritual attachment and emotional emergency status. I got logistics and utility. And now, Apparently a mother reduced to a role that made me easier to shelve. There was no mention of the wedding, no apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done, just the photo, the note, and a sentence about hoping time would soften things. I sat on the floor with that frame in my lap and cried harder than I had cried at the wedding. Because here's the part people don't say enough. Sometimes the thing that breaks you isn't the biggest cruelty. It's the almost tender thing. The little half gesture that reminds you the person hurting you also knows exactly where the soft parts are. My husband found me there and asked if I wanted him to throw the note away. I said yes. Then no. Then yes again. He threw it away. I kept the photo. Of course I did. I put it in the bedroom, not the living room. Some part of me didn't want my mother participating in every ordinary Tuesday, while I was still angry at how much of her memory had been turned into a battlefield. That sounds irrational? It is irrational. Welcome to Grief with Family Issues. Months passed. I settled into marriage, which was less dramatic than people make it sound when the relationship is already solid. It wasn't suddenly a fairy tale. It was just us. Same weird jokes, same habits, now with legal paperwork and more towels. And thank God for that. Thank God something in my life stayed boring in the best way. But the family situation kept surfacing in ugly little ways. A holiday invitation sent to both of us and then accidentally updated without my name. A relative reporting that my sister had taken over hosting duties because my father was exhausted. Another relative whispering that she was pushing him to update his will. That should have upset me more than it did. By then, I was weirdly numb to the inheritance angle. Let her have the dishes, the furniture, the jewelry, the burden, the whole haunted bundle. Material proof of being chosen is a poor substitute for peace. The one thing that kept catching me off guard was how young I felt whenever anybody brought them up. I could be at work, handling actual adult problems, answering 10 emails, paying bills, doing all the normal competent life things, and then one mention of my father or sister would turn me into a girl again. Not childish, just old in the wrong way, pulled backward. So I finally started therapy, which, yes, probably should have happened sooner, but therapy when you're the functional one can feel weirdly indulgent until you're sitting in your car crying because a grocery store song reminded you of your mother's casserole dish. My therapist said something in our third session that made me mad enough to know it was true. She said, "You were assigned the role of emotional adult too early, and now your family punishes you for refusing it." I said, "That sounds expensive. Are all your insights like that?" She laughed, traitor. But she was right. I had spent so many years trying to be understandable to people committed to misunderstanding me in exactly the ways that kept the system running. Once I stopped doing that, everybody acted like I had changed. I hadn't. Not really. I had just become less useful to their version of the family. And people do not like it when your healing interrupts their convenience. The first time I saw my father again was not at a funeral or in a hospital or any of the dramatic places people like to imagine estranged families collide. It was at a pharmacy on a Tuesday evening while I was holding cough drops and trying to decide whether the generic version was a scam. He was near the back aisle, comparing something on 2 boxes with the exact same frown he used when reading utility bills. I noticed him before he noticed me, and for 1 second I genuinely considered abandoning my basket and power walking out like a witness in a bad documentary. Instead, I froze. He looked older. That's such a simple sentence, but it hit me hard. Older in the neck, older around the eyes, smaller somehow. Not fragile exactly, just worn down in a way I had never let myself imagine, because anger likes the other person full-sized. He saw me then. We both stood there with that awful public politeness people use when history is too big for the location. He took a half step forward. I didn't move. He asked how I was. I said fine. He asked about my husband. I said fine. Then we just stood there marinating in the consequences of decades. Finally, he said, "I miss you." And I wish I could tell you that made me soften. I wish I could say hearing that from him healed some secret child part of me. What it actually did was make me tired. Because missing me and changing were not the same thing, and he had spent my whole life confusing emotion with repair. So I said, "Missing me is not the same as respecting me." His face changed. Not angry. More like embarrassed by how direct I had become. He said he'd made mistakes. Plural. Mistakes. I almost laughed because skipping my wedding and then threatening to erase me from my mother's legacy did not feel like little accidental wrong turns. But I didn't say that. I just asked if he was still living with my sister. He said yes. That was enough information for me. Because as long as he was still inside that same orbit, With the same roles, same panic, same management system, there was nothing real to talk about. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He could miss me all day long from the center of the machine. That did not mean I had to crawl back into it and call the Bruises family. He asked if we could have coffee sometime. I looked at the cough drops in my basket like they might answer for me. Then I said, "Not now. Not never." I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I just meant exactly what I said. Not now. Not while I still felt my shoulders tighten at the sound of his voice. Not while my sister could still reach me through him like smoke under a door. Not while he was offering longing instead of accountability. He nodded, and for once he didn't argue. He just said, "Okay." I left the pharmacy, sat in my car, and shook for 10 full minutes. Not because I had made the wrong choice. Because I had made the right one and it still felt terrible. That's the part no one sells you when they talk about boundaries. They don't always feel powerful. Sometimes they feel lonely and anticlimactic and weirdly rude even when they're necessary. Sometimes you drive home with cough drops and guilt and have to remind yourself that protecting your peace can still hurt. A month after that, I heard through a relative that my sister was engaged. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Not because marriage for her was impossible. Plenty of difficult people get married every day, some of them twice. It was the timing that got me. The speed. The way she had apparently transformed from fragile, near-collapse woman who could not emotionally survive a schedule conflict into a glowing bride-to-be posting ring hand pictures and inspirational quotes about new beginnings. That news did something ugly and honest in me. It made me furious. Not noble furious, not concerned furious, jealous furious, petty furious. I wanted to throw a shoe, because part of me knew exactly what would happen. My father would pour himself into her wedding, his redemption project, his second chance to perform devotion correctly. He would show up early. He would pay for something he couldn't afford. He would carry chairs and tissues and guilt. He would probably walk her down the aisle with the kind of shining face I had spent half my life trying to earn. My therapist later called that anticipatory grief. I called it emotional acid reflux. I did not contact my sister. I did not congratulate her. But for about 2 weeks, I checked her public posts from a fake account like the most emotionally evolved woman in the country. Don't judge me, or judge me a little. I earned it. What I saw was exactly what I expected. Bridal appointments, family dinners, my father in the background of photos looking tired but devoted, my sister captioning everything with lines about healing and being chosen and honoring our mother in all the meaningful moments. That last one made me throw my phone on the couch so hard the remote hit the floor. My husband found me pacing and said, "Do you want comfort or honesty?" I said, "Dangerous opening." He said, "You're hurting yourself with information you can't use." Again, rude. Again, correct. So I stopped looking, and in that tiny, stupid act, not checking, not monitoring, not volunteering to keep injuring myself with proof of their unchanged behavior, I felt something shift. Small, but real. I was not over it. I may never be all the way over it, but I was finally a little less available for fresh damage. These days, when people ask about my family, I don't do the old dance anymore. I don't smooth it out or make it charming or say we're complicated with a little laugh like I'm apologizing for the mess. I say we're not close. That's it. Clean. True. Sometimes that answer disappoints people because they want the hopeful version, the reunion version, the version where a father realizes too late, a sister softens, everybody cries in the right order, and love finally behaves itself. That isn't my version. Maybe it never was. What I have instead is smaller, and honestly, more useful. A quiet apartment that feels safe, a marriage that doesn't require me to disappear to keep the peace, a photo of my mother on my dresser, a number of blocked contacts I don't feel guilty about anymore, and a life I built without waiting for anyone to finally choose me correctly. I chose me, late, messy, angry, imperfectly. But I did, and that has had to be enough.